Welcome back to List Building with Maniacal Cackle. This week I'm playing Dr. McMourning. And in previous videos you'll probably have seen what I referred to as modular list building in some of the other lists, where basically you had a bunch of independent packages in the crew and you could kind of swap things in and out willy-nilly. This week we have a very different approach, which is a very synergy-oriented approach, which means that every time you change one model in the crew, the entire implications for the rest of the crew really change, and it gets quite convoluted to build the list, and so I'll try to highlight some of those things here. But first, let's go over the pool. This is the map. Lots of blocking terrain, and a fair bit of severe, but it's not as intense as other maps. I'm comfortable playing McMourning on this map, even though he doesn't have too much ways to ignore severe. So I think it can be handled. It's a pretty reasonable map. It's corrupted Leylines. And the schemes are Breakthrough, Detonate Charges, Hidden Martyrs, Let Them Bleed, and Bait and Switch. So that's fairly scheme marker intensive pool. There's some killing options, and there's lots of different places you can score points. So this is a very wide open pool. And my opponent has decided to declare Lucius. While it's not 100% clear which one he's going to declare, realistically everyone here is declaring Lucius 2 into these pools, and especially Neverborn. And Lucius 2 for this pool has a couple of really big things to watch out for. First off, with Ancient Pact, he can pretty much guarantee last activation, and he can use Lucius to use down the wrong path to throw your models off the ley lines, so you have to be able to build around that without making it your only thing you're doing, because you don't want to ignore the game just for the sake of scrambling to answer just what their master is doing. And then on top of that, he's got a very tough crew that does tons of damage. Like if you wander near a Lucius crew, it's very easy to just get melted. They're very dangerous. So those are some of the things to watch out for. So overall, him putting pressure on my crew is something he's a lot better than I am at coming over and putting pressure on his crew. So I've kind of tried to build my list with the idea of being resilient enough that I could sustain his pressure without relying on trying to out-pressure him, as we'll see. And the first example of that is, so this was one of the builds I attempted with Dr. McMourning. I used the first Dr. McMourning with Whisper and Valedictorian. It's such an elite list, I didn't even hire the zombie pup because I wanted better activation control. And this was the modular approach, where Valedictorian and Nurse make a really good combo. Dead Rider and Gwison are my answer to Lucius 2. Down the Wrong Path is a stat 6 willpower attack, so it's going to struggle to guarantee knocking the Rider off a ley line. And then I threw in a Gwison to just say, you know what, I'm going to make it just such a nightmare to knock me off the ley line that it's probably not even viable or worth bothering. So that's sort of my package to say, my points are secure for this strategy. You're going to have to contest me on the schemes is the goal with that. And then if you haven't seen me use Nurse and Valedictorian before, basically she can attack Valedictorian twice with the stun trigger to push her 6 inches up the board, then heals her for the focus trigger to remove the stun, and so you have a full health focused Valedictorian with 6 extra inches of movement. It's a really great combo. But I think it's still not quite enough to make McMourning 1 viable. And then I had a Necropunk just because this is such a scheming pool. I needed some scheming power for it, and I think the Necropunk really makes a lot of these schemes viable, like Breakthrough, Detonate Charges, Hidden Martyrs, of course, Bait and Switch. He helps with all of those, and even Let Them Bleed a little bit. So those were all good models. I did do a test run of that list, and I just got destroyed on turn 1 because it turns out just running into Lucius's crew is extremely dangerous. He already wants people to end up in his bubble and kill them all, and so assisting him with that by running into them is not a good idea. So this list just didn't work well, so no to that. So then we go to the McMourning 2 builds, and what's nice about McMourning 2 is he's a really, really good summoner, and summoners are really great on Leylines because summons can do the strategies. He's the reason I picked McMourning for this round, as I was hoping to play McMourning too. Um, I was a little bit worried I'd need McMourning 1 to answer things like Mysterious Emissary or Vasilisa, or Stitch Together, all of which you might expect to see with Lucius 2 this event, but I decided it's just not worth it. I'd rather play KG to those threats rather than try to answer them with pure fighting force. And so, for McMourning, I'd like to put the Whisper on him, because, like, he doesn't have damage flips, so whenever he's flipping cards, like, you're going to make use of every card on the Whisper there. Although it can be a little bit annoying, because if they're all bad cards, then you have to grind your way through them, which can also be really annoying. Zombie Pup, of course, because the blood poisoning heals are really helpful. The Dead Rider Quisson combo for the reason that I mentioned before. And then you've got this this package here, I think, is the core of a really excellent McMourning 2 crew. What this allows you to do is it gives you a Summoned Flesh construct with an extra, with 2 upgrades on the Flesh construct and 2 upgrades on the Rogue Necromancy, and Killer Instinct on the Gravedigger just does all sorts of work, because when you pick up those Soul Stones, you can pick up the corpse to get a Soul Stone, you can refund it by putting the corpse back down, or you can draw a card, so it's just generating a lot of resources for the crew. And then, of course, it gives them a Deadly Pursuit on top of that, which is really, really helpful in this schemy, mobile crew. Against a lot of crews, I actually wanted to use Gravedigger as my primary scheme runner. So in my original build for this, I was going to swap out Dead Rider and Quisson for Valedictorian and Nurse, was my very original build, is that I wanted to play McMourning 2 with this pool. But I've had to adapt because of Lucius 2, like, Gravedigger just cannot run the ley line here because Lucius can teleport to him and then one-shot him, and then, like, that's just a terrible, terrible plan. So I'm having to rely on a more resilient package for running the Lodestone. But the problem is, when I was just going over the theorycraft of this, is if you go look at the schemes, you gotta think, well, I can score the schemes, but it's going to take a lot of work, and that's really easy to disrupt. Like, I'll have these Summon Flesh constructs that can run and score Detonate Charges or Breakthrough, or Bait and Switch, or can help me score Let Them Bleed. McMourning himself is good at scoring Bait and Switch. And Hidden Martyrs, of course, this crew has several combinations for it. But what it ends up doing is basically the models that I want to be effective in doing stuff, it puts a lot of pressure on them to score. So I thought what this list really needs is a Necropunk. So I swapped out the Corpse Curator for the Necropunk. And this felt really good because Necropunks are super good schemers. They can run and do stuff. And what I needed out of this guy was I needed him to be cheap, durable, able to place, because the terrain, while I've mentioned this crew can deal with the terrain, it provides enough of a challenge that it needs to be able to place, and also that it's not easy to disrupt with engagement, so it needs to be able to start the round engaged and get out of there. So the obvious solution to that is a Necropunk. But I was sitting there thinking, and what I realized is Little Gassers provide this exact same role in keywords, so it's 2 stones cheaper. And so I swapped out the Little Gasser for the Necropunk, so that saved me 2 stones. And then I thought, well, actually, the Whisper on McMourning's really nice, but it does have that issue where if you see 3 low cards, you can't do as much about it. So I deleted the Whisper, that got me another 2 stones. And so I added back in the Curator, which got me back to the point that I wanted to get, and then I was down 2 stones all up, but that's alright because this crew only has the 1 stone user and it can generate soul stones. And so that's a really good example of where you can it's a really good reminder that you shouldn't just say, oh, what are the powerful models I can slot in here for the job. It's good to go back to the original question of, like, well, what does the model actually need to accomplish? Is there a cheap model that can do the job just as well? And I think while Little Gasser's not as good as a Necropunk at what I want it to do, it is good enough. It's adding another angle to score that, while I'm not relying on it for all my points, that if he ignores it, it can go score it, and if he goes and kills it, then that frees up the rest of my team to go score. So it's accomplishing the exact role that it needs to just by existing. And that's something to watch out for with cheap minions in general, is actually it's often really, really worthwhile to grab a 3 or 4 stone minion to just grab an extra AP that can run somewhere on the board and pull a bit of aggro off your enemy. So I hope that makes sense of how that sort of process happened. It needed to be a big coherent list where other than like Dead Rider and Gwison work together, but as you can see, every time I shifted, for instance, some of my builds I wanted to take the Nurse out to make room, but if I took the Nurse out I needed to take out the Valedictorian. Then if I took out the Valedictorian I didn't have enough fighting power, so I needed to swap something in. And that's when I realized Dead Rider and Gwison actually make not an equivalent swap for these two models, but they pivot into a different strategy, works just fine. And then over here again, like every time I removed the Corpse Curator, that changed the dynamic of these models. So working around trying to figure out how to make this grouping work. And you'll see more about like why this is about the right balance. In McMourning 2, I think that you can go overboard on keyword because McMourning 2 can only offer so much support. And so what we've got here now is we've got like a super efficient engine. It's just really, really efficient how smoothly this gets up and running. And then I have a bunch of models that can go do their own thing and don't need to just sit babysitting each other anymore. Whereas I feel like if it's a bit less all in than some of the pure upgrade builds, or like the pure summon builds where you can summon 10 stones rather than 7. But I think this is a nice compromise, and we'll see how it works out. So we'll see you at the game.